Welcome to the Kyperian Commentary Podcast. This is episode number 138, and I'm here today to talk to my fellow cult leader, Pastor Bill Smith, about the cult of Reformed Evangelical Churches, the CREC. Bill, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Rick.
So you wrote an article for Kyperian Commentary recently called The Cult of Reformed Evangelical Churches. Where does that come from? I thought we were a communion of churches. When did we become a cult?
That's a good question. There have been a number of people I know online, social media, things like that, refer to us as cult. The kind of the inspiration for the article came from more anecdotal, personal experience. There were some people that I know that are kind of outside the CREC circles, but still connected, referring to us as a cult. And not in the academic sense, as an actual religion, but in the colloquial sense of, you're led by a charismatic leader, you're heterodox in some way. And just kind of wondering where that came from, and that the article was my musing on that, and
right.
just from my personal experience, seeing, okay, how are they connecting, or what are they saying? Why are they saying this? And just examining some of the things that they've said and why they said them. So
right. So why are we a cult exactly? I've heard people say that before, and I think you've got kind of two classes of, well, maybe a few classes of people. You've got the people who are really, really anti-Moscow, who are really anti-CREC. Right. Of course, they're going to say you're a cult. They always do. And then I do know the people who would publicly distance themselves from the CREC, but at night they're in bed with the covers over their heads and a flashlight reading Doug Wilson books. And in the middle there are people that we would call our brothers and sisters in Christ who we love, and we want to be united to them in the faith, but they look at us and think, oh, that's weird cultish stuff. What is it? What's the cultish part of it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you're right. I mean, some people they see the strong personality in Doug Wilson, and they associate cults with strong personalities, and everybody rallies around this personality. And now you and I know that Doug is not really the Pope of the CREC. I'm not certain he even wants to be, but he does have a strong. He's very influential, but not everybody just kind of hovers around Doug and follows Doug in everything that he does, even though we respect him. Some would say that it's because of Doug Wilson. Others might even say that our adoption of the federal vision, whatever that means, that they would accuse us of all these things, and I wasn't talking about either of those groups. I mean, they would certainly call us cults, but a cult. But I was talking more about kind of the broader evangelicals that I've come across, run into, connected with, who see the commitment of our families to worship and to being with God's people on the Lord's Day. And whether they're on vacation, and I know this is not across the board in the CREC,
right?
But it is this cultural air that we breathe in the CREC. That worship is vital. Worship is at the center of the world. I mean, we are characterized. One of the things that characterizes us is covenant renewal worship. That when people think of CREC, they think of covenant renewal worship. That's at the center of our existence. And then with that, which isn't tangential, but it is paedo communion.
Right.
Paedo communion being, and we can get to that later probably, but paedo communion, speaking of the fact that our children worship with us, we're all worshiping together. And so all of this is about, worship being central. When, there are people I've been connected with in the churches, in CREC churches, who won't move to another place unless they find a healthy church first. They may have great job opportunities, but they won't go to a place unless they can find a good church where their families are going to be encouraged and be fed. And that is kind of out of sync with a lot of just standard evangelicals. There are plenty of churches, you'll find something when you get there. Don't worry about that. That can be a secondary kind of issue. And to say, no, we're not moving to a city unless we can find a good, healthy church. That just it doesn't sit.
The
It doesn't.
priorities are really different,
Yeah,
right?
the priorities are different. Yeah. And I think a lot of that, and I don't want to, let me also say the CREC is not the only denomination, or our churches are not the only churches that are called cults. Any church that has a strong commitment to a local community and where people are serious about their faith and really consider themselves brothers and sisters. We are family and we'll be there for one another. There's another church in our area that's very strong in that way, and they've been called a cult too. And they're not on the same page as us, but they're still our brothers and sisters. But they've been called a cult because they're very committed to one another. They have strong community, and so we're not unique in this, but it is an experience in the CREC that I've seen. And the article wasn't to brag or anything like that. It was just to examine, okay, why are they calling us this? And it was that commitment, because one of the things that I've seen, and I come out of Baptistic culture myself, is that the focus on the individual, and his personal relationship with Jesus in a way that kind of disconnects him from the church, that the church is kind of an addendum to his
Right.
personal spiritual life. And that therefore that's not the center of his life. He does it as one of the activities. You got baseball, you've got ballet, you've got church, you've got all these things. But
Right.
in our theology, worship is centered, and the church life is centered.
Right.
And so worship becomes central to our lives, and then that worship moves out to cultural engagement. And we really live this stuff during the week. Family worship is emphasized. All these types of things are emphasized. Discipleship of children is emphasized. And that's strange. And all I'm saying is it's strange to American Baptist culture, American
Right.
Christianity, so to speak.
You see that even here in the Bible Belt. I'm here in Virginia, and there's so many people. I even knew them, growing up, who would go to the race in Martinsville on Sunday. They had the NASCAR races, but they would always have someone come up front and do a little devotion and say a prayer, and so they could feel like, well, we've had our Jesus time this week. Now we can watch the race. Because
Right,
the church really is about, I have this personal time with Jesus. I've had this connection with Jesus, which I could get anywhere. I could get in the
right.
woods with my
Yeah,
Bible under a tree. I could get it at NASCAR. The actual gathering of the saints to worship the Lord and in covenant renewal worship isn't really on the radar at all. So when you
right.
have churches that do that, and you're right, I've seen non-CREC churches that focus on that as well, but it does seem almost like an aberration in our world today when you have ball games, soccer, things like that going on Sundays. Um, if in a cult, uh, I've heard people say things like, you guys are a cult before, and I've always thought, wow, if we're a cult, we're the easiest cult to leave ever, right? You want to
That's
go
right.
to another church? We'll send you a member transfer. Go where you can
Right.
worship God the best. But um, where was I going with that? But it seems like it's not even enforced sort of in a top-down way. I don't know about your church, but it seems like people do it because it's the culture and because they really, really want
Right.
to do it.
Yeah.
They love it. What accounts for that, do you think, within sort of our circles?
That's a very good question. I do think that there are there the cultural shift has been that the faith wasn't taken very seriously.
Mhm.
Okay. And it was in a lot of ways just superficial or individualistic like this. And there has to be some kind, there has to be more to this. And so I think people, when they find people who are who are very committed, who are seeking to be biblical, and who want, of course, who want to do the right thing, they want to be connected to that community. They want to be a part. And I mean, quite frankly, also the culture itself is very, there are lots of lonely people,
Mm-hmm.
and there needs to be this sense of connection, and these people want to be connected. They want to be, um, they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And I think, our theology, and along with our communities, uh, helps provide that kind of kingdom vision, that purpose, that overall purpose, that we are not here just simply to bide our time until we go to heaven, and that kind of, we are here for a greater kingdom purpose, to build for the kingdom of God and pass that on to the next generation, pass the baton, as it were. And so having that kind of overall purpose, having that kind of connection, I think, uh, I hesitate to say it this way, but kind of fills that void, where people are saying, okay, there's got to be more to this than
Right.
just existing as an individual like this. So, um,
So you were talking about children worshiping, and Paedo communion is a big part of that, but also just having the children in the service.
yeah.
Uh, why does that strike people as an odd thing?
Well, I mean, it is because we have such a culture of me time,
Yeah.
that we're all separated, we're all segregated according to our ages, and the children, they need to go somewhere where mom and daddy can be left alone to be able to worship individually. They need to be focused on themselves, and there's I think, a fundamental misunderstanding of worship. But that, I think, is where that comes from. And again, it's that culture that is very individualistic, that doesn't see worship as a community event, but as a church event, or the whole church body. Of course, in most of these churches where children are shipped off during worship, I would say most of the churches that are where they're shipped off during worship, there is the idea that the children aren't a part of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would even say, even in Paedo Baptist churches, a lot of Paedo Baptist churches, because, and again, I don't want this to sound accusatory, or just kind of being high-minded as in the CREC, but when you baptize children but still don't see them as members of the church,
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessary for them to be in worship. And so it just lends itself to, and that's what most of the Reformed world does. Baptists, of course, are very consistent with this. They say they're not part of the church. I mean, they're not baptized. So we can take them off to children's church or whatever. But with our theology of Paedo communion, of course, it runs deeper than just, okay, we want to give bread and wine to our children. It is saying you are a part of the body of Christ. And
Right.
because you're a part of the body of Christ, you need to be in the worship service. And that's going to require something of parents. It's going to require that they train their children to worship, that they can't just run wild, because worship is supposed to be decent and in order. So they're training them to worship the entire time. And that means that they're not going to be able to hear everything and all that. That's true. But it's not just about me. It's not just about me coming and getting my personal cup filled, so to speak. It is about us together worshiping
Right.
God, appearing before Him as the armies of God, and which includes little children whom God has ordained strength in their mouths. So, according to Psalm 8, so um, it is about us together. So I think that's what makes it different for us.
Right. And if you have that attitude, then church can't just be a number of songs and a lecture.
Right.
Right. When the sermon becomes the only thing that's going on that's worth being there for, and afterwards it's, did I get anything out of the sermon? Mom, who's got three little ones and a nursing baby, even with dad's help, may not get much out of the sermon.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
My
Funny.
wife, of course, sat alone for years. We have 6 children, um, all grown now. We're empty nesters, but she's told young mothers for a long time. She said, "I didn't hear a sermon for 10 years." She was alone. She was a single mom in worship, so to speak.
Yeah.
She was helping the children, disciplining the children while I was leading the worship. And so, she wasn't able to sit there and just soak in everything that was being said and done and just completely zone out, everything around her so that she
Right.
could completely focus on herself and her, her spiritual experience.
How did she manage to grow in sanctification during that time?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. It's because she had a good husband at home. That's what it
Okay,
was.
there you go.
I'm joking.
Yeah.
I'm joking. We worked hard. We worked hard, but and I can't tell you. I mean, our 6 of our children faithful. I'm proud
Mhm.
of them. The long-term benefits were and are tremendous. I mean, we've got 6 children, 8 grandchildren, one on the way. They're all being faithful. And her work within that worship, within those worship services, all those years, um, was fruitful. And so, I've seen this at a personal level. I mean, I've
Right.
seen this lived out. And so there is long-term benefit for the entire kingdom, even though individuals like mothers may not be able to soak in everything in the worship service. And that's the bigger purpose I was talking about earlier. We have a larger purpose than just get an emotional high or feeding off of everything that's in the sermon,
Yeah.
whatever. So,
Um, I remember, I think it was about, it might have been 4 years ago, or no, it might have been 6 years ago, 20th anniversary of the CREC. I can't remember the exact date, but when Virgil Hurt was the presiding minister, he commissioned some statistics, just made a call to all the churches, give me your stats, because we've been around for 2 decades as a denomination. We've had kids who have grown up in the CREC, and just questioning how many of them remain faithful, regular church attending, godly
yeah.
Christians. And the numbers were, it was over 95%, which
Wow.
is pretty unheard of, when you look across the board at statistics. And it was even, it was, I think it was the 80s, maybe even upper 80% of those kids who went on to be in CREC churches, who liked the CREC and wanted to be part of it, which sounds cultish to me. But no, in your experience as a minister, do CREC kids, after being in church, having
Mm.
communion, having family worship, being raised with this focus on Christian daily living, being connected to the community, do they launch well? In your experience,
Yeah, that's
what
a good
what have
question. It's hard because as a pastor, you see all the good, the bad, and the ugly
Mhm.
in all the
Yeah,
churches, and sometimes it's easy to focus on the ugly
right,
because they get your attention. And we've seen apostasy,
right,
and we've seen people wander from the faith, not being any church at all, or leave the CREC, being bitter with churches. But in our church right here, while we've seen some of that, we've also seen we have
hmm
multiple generations within the church itself that is continuing to build. We have um, a number of families who have been here from the beginning, and they have their children, they have their grandchildren here, and they are worshiping faithfully. And so, yeah, on the whole, I think as a like you said, the numbers bear it out. There is a general faithfulness that happens, even though there are things along the way that, of course, uh, there are some children who don't make it. But I don't want to get into comparison of averages,
Right.
but in the general evangelical world, if you look up Barna or whatever, I don't think you're gonna see those types of numbers in the general evangelical church. I mean, the standard was when I was growing up, you basically you hit teenage, you get converted, you get converted
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in your early years. Then you sow your wild oats during teenage years in college. And then when you want to get married, you come back and you settle back down into the church because the kids need to go to church.
Right.
And that there's what I'm seeing is very different in the culture. Just an example, the number of youth camps, Summer Sanctus, and a number of others that are going around the country. And I know I say that different than what everybody else says, but
I don't know what they say.
Summer
Sanctus?
Sanctus. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
and I can't. I was a music major in college, and I can't say Sanctus um, without cringing. So anyway, the when I see that, and I see these children making connections and being encouraged, the called conference, Summer Sanctus, all these others that are going around, they're being encouraged, and they're coming up strong, and they're encouraging one another. And I watch this. My children participated in all those. It is very encouraging to see what's going on in the next generation in CREC. These children seem to be doing fairly well on the whole.
Yeah. It's exciting to see. I remember when I was a teenager, um, my family, I wasn't homeschooled. I was in the local public school,
Right.
not CREC. There's no CREC then. But my parents were really diligent to make sure I knew that Christianity was every day of your life. It wasn't just Sunday morning. We talked about the Bible a ton. We talked about, that sort of thing all the time. We talked about Christ
Mhm.
a lot. And I remember people telling my parents, oh, when your kids get out of school, when they're out on their own, they're going to just go completely wild because you have sheltered them so much and you've been so strict and you've held them back so much that they're just going to go crazy when they're out. And neither me nor my sister went crazy when we got out, actually.
That's good.
And I've heard similar things about homeschooling, CREC kind of people. Oh, these kids are sheltered, they're repressed, they're just itching to get out. And so they're wild oats to have their time of rebellion away from the church. And occasionally you see that, as you've said. I can only think of a couple examples. For the most part, that's not the case. They love the church, they love Jesus, and they want to keep being Christians.
Yeah, and that's good. And one of I think it was one of the things to refer to our inestimable leader, Doug Wilson. Um, it's one of the things that I see happening is I know in families this has to be the case, but it also has to be the case in the church. The faith has to be shown to be beautiful,
Right.
and we are attracted to beauty. And when children see this life is good, this life is fun, it is productive, it is fulfilling. And when we make the faith beautiful like that, like it is, when we actually represent it like it should be, and make it beautiful in our homes, in our churches, our children are going to be attracted to that.
Yeah.
They're going to want that. Just like your children, when they see mom and dad, they see them interacting, they're healthy, and they're doing what they need to do. The children say, "You know what? When I grow up, I want to be like that."
Right.
That's what we're aiming for in the CREC, I think, is to make the faith beautiful. And at these summer camps, which are very different than the ones I went to growing up, they are encouraged. They see these other children they're like-minded. We're doing the same things and it looks good. We're
Right.
not, and we've got, I mean, like I said in the article, we have our weird uncles and we have the outliers. We have,
I don't know who the weird uncles are, Bill.
well, if you don't know who the weird uncle is, it's probably you. That's the way it always goes.
Right.
Um, but I mean, we have those outliers who are press things to the limits, and they get strange with a lot of things. Whether it's hyper masculinity or uh, take it headship all screwed up in the home or whatever. There are always those kinds of people, but on the whole, what I'm seeing is good health.
Right.
And again, making the faith beautiful in front of our children, and they're attracted to it.
Right. Can I shift just a little bit here? We've
Sure.
kind of it seemed to me like three main points in your article. The first was sort of the church-centric mindset that we worship God together as the gathered people of God, a focus on training and discipling your kids. And
Yeah.
then third, you mentioned a rejection of feminism. So, you talked about the hyper masculine guys who get it
Yeah.
wrong by going
Right.
too far in that direction. But how do you see sort of a denomination-wide rejection of feminism as characteristic of the CREC and as an explanation of the strength of the CREC?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I came out of a denomination, which I will not name, that one of my last Presbyterian meetings, the ladies were up there leading the worship during Presbyterian meeting. All these ordained ministers and elders were out in the congregation, and ladies were up there leading. And I'm thinking, this is really, really backwards.
Right.
What's going on. So I think one of the primary places where you see, and this is conservative denomination that I'm talking about, on the whole, and and by the way, they encouraged us as pastors to push women forward in leading worship and things like that. And I was saying, no, they can't do this, because one of the things, and this goes back to the worship and our understanding of worship, is that one of the ways that I see that the CREC is rejecting feminism is that we don't think men and women are the same,
Right.
and that we're different all the way down, and that means that we have different roles. And so we do not push our women to the front lines of liturgical warfare.
Mm.
Our men stand on the front lines of liturgical warfare.
Right.
And we're not scared of that masculinity. We're not scared of that responsibility that comes with that. And we're happy to take that on. And we protect our women. And in feminism, women think they don't need any protection. And feminist men will say the same. And is that, we need to exalt them in this sense, but really we're debasing them when we do that. And so I see the CREC working in a way to promote genuine masculinity. And again, while we do that, I realize that there are lots of variations on that, which can be problematic. I mean, there are always extremes which you have to avoid. But I'm talking about as a general culture. What I see in council meetings, what I see in Presbyterian meetings, is just a strong commitment to men doing what men are supposed to do. And so I think that's at the heart of our fighting
Right.
the feminist culture.
I've seen also in churches where men don't lead, the women naturally want to take the lead.
Yeah.
I think C.S. Lewis said, hell for a woman is sitting in a room and the tea kettle's boiling over and the phone's ringing, someone's knocking at the door, and she has to sit there and do nothing. Right. Women are built by God to want to help. And so when the men don't lead, they will step in. Right or wrong, they're going to. And I've seen a lot of churches where women lead by default because the men don't. So a lot of times it's not even that you have to, say, no, we're not going to allow women to lead. They're all clamoring to. In some cases, it is. The really feminists do want to lead, but a lot of times it's just the men need to step up and be in the church. That takes care of
Absolutely.
the problem.
And one of the things that's one of the problems that you do see in a lot of churches is that, that it's not built for men to lead.
Right.
But I mean, there's a dual problem here. I mean, because men abdicating,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of our, sorry about that. That's one of our first sins, is abdicating our masculine responsibility.
Right.
Women desiring to rule over men, they're already inclined to do that because of the consequence of the fall. And when those two things start working and the sin grows, it becomes a problem. And I think us fighting against that it's going to remain an important part of the CREC, because we're really going to be countercultural.
Right.
We really are already. And you can hear things about misogyny and everything else, and about how we all hate women and that kind of thing. But I've experienced one of the things I've experienced as a pastor is, as I've had to do some liturgical reforms in churches, and I've heard from women, and it wasn't like I set out to say, okay, we're gonna make this worship really masculine in the sense, the kind of thing. But I've heard from women who just come up and randomly say, I really do appreciate the worship. It is very masculine. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel secure, protected, provided for, where they don't have to feel like they're up front, they're being thrown under the bus. And when a woman experiences that, a godly woman especially, where she can rest and not feel like she has to get up and do these things, she's gonna enjoy that. She's gonna be in a place where she says, this is really good. I really like this. I really, and your women become happier in that regard.
Right. Well, Bill, thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast and talk about your article with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Ray.
I'm going to put a link to the article in the notes so that you can go read it if you want to, and hopefully we'll have you back on here again sometime.
Yeah, very good.
All right.